At just before 5 a.m. on April 18th, the Iowa Senate voted 32 to 17 to pass Senate File 542, which would allow children as young as 14 to work hazardous jobs such as in the logging, mining, and meatpacking sectors, so long as such work is done in accordance with an approved training program. The bill now moves to the Iowa House for deliberation. Similar legislation has recently been introduced in several states, with one already being signed into law in Arkansas by Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders. The Iowa bill would also free businesses from civil liability if a teen worker gets sick, injured, or killed on the job due to negligence of the company. Businesses would only be liable for gross negligence and willful misconduct, a significantly more onerous barrier to clear in court. Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds spoke in support of the legislation. Happily recalling her teenage years spent working at Yonkers, she described the bill as an empowering opportunity for young people to learn the value of hard work and financial responsibility. This bill has been widely criticized by Iowa Senate Democrats, who voted unanimously to oppose it, as well as by labor rights experts. Charlie Wishman, president of the Iowa Federation of Labor, called efforts to loosen child labor laws around the U.S. a lazy way of dealing with the fact that certain states don't have enough workers. Citing research that has found serious adverse effects for teenagers working more than 20 hours a week, Wishman said, "These legislators don't care about that because it's not their kids. This law is intended for somebody else's kids." The move comes after the U.S. Department of Labor in February levied $1.5 million in penalties against Packers Sanitation Services Incorporated for employing at least 102 children between the ages of 13 and 17 to do dangerous jobs at meatpacking plants in 8 states. These children worked overnight shifts using hazardous chemicals to clean processing equipment such as brisket saws and head splitters used to kill animals. The legislation would permit teens to do this kind of work in accordance with work-based learning or a school or employer-administered work-related program. Now, who defines what constitutes a work-related program? Well, the language of the bill is rather vague, leaving ample wiggle room for lawyers to argue against future consequences such as those faced by Packers Sanitation. Now, this is all happening in the context of a so-called workforce crisis following COVID-related workplace disruptions. There are not as many people willing to do work, particularly in not-so-pleasant jobs, for particularly not so much pay, a function of the public en masse rethinking their career paths, opting for work-from-home options, or opting to switch to work more aligned with their passions. Workers are now flexing at least a bit of their collective power, which, at least for corporate America, is indeed a crisis. Well aware of the optics of this bill, Senate Republicans have done everything in their power to minimize dialogue related to it. Passing the bill in the wee hours of the morning certainly helps to bury the story. They further weaponize their supermajority power by restricting the deliberation process in an unprecedented way, as described by Iowa Senator Zach Walz in this 2 a.m. video tweet.
Hey, good morning, everybody. It's just about 2 o'clock in the morning here in the Iowa Senate. And things have ground to a halt because for the first time, as long as anyone here can remember, the Republican floor manager, so this is the person who's actually running a bill, refused to answer a direct question from a Democratic senator about the substance of the law that we're actually debating tonight, which is about rolling back protections against child labor in our state. This is completely unprecedented, and we're told that this is a new policy from Iowa Senate Republicans based in response to a Supreme Court ruling here in the state of Iowa that used debate on the Senate floor to strike down a law that Republicans had supported. So now what we're being told is that Republican senators are not going to answer questions about legislative intent. Obviously, this is a huge departure from how the Iowa Senate, which is a deliberative legislative body, has operated since its inception 150 years ago.
The meatpacking industry is notorious for its dangerous working conditions, and now children may soon be exposed to the harrowing physical as well as psychological toll, including increased instances of addiction, depression, and suicide. No surprise to see that this industry, which normalizes a whole host of unconscionable animal agricultural practices, which seem to draw inspiration from medieval torture devices, things like gestation crates, ventilation shutdown, cutting off pigs' tails and testicles without anesthetic, the list goes on. So this industry is not exactly one which is going to be looking out for its workers either. It's beyond absurd to think that so-called work programs held in a slaughterhouse are any kind of net positive for young people in their formative years. Allowing children to work in these settings is not only a moral failing, but a disaster waiting to happen. Yet the business of animal agriculture relies on cheap labor. For those of us fortunate enough to have other options, we would never choose this kind of work. So the power brokers must resort to those most vulnerable, often immigrants, and in this case, children. Now, this is really reminiscent of documents I've seen which were received by DXC's legal team via Freedom of Information Act request, showing emails between Governor Reynolds' office, Iowa Select Farm, which is the nation's fourth largest pork producer, and the Trump administration. This was in the spring of 2021 with COVID ravaging meatpacking plants. All three parties were eagerly collaborating to loosen the requirement on work visas to bring in more immigrant labor. So here you have a circumstance where immigrants are subjected to this infection potentially by COVID in workplaces which are already among society's most dangerous. The industry and its government cronies are doing all they can to keep their sordid deeds under the radar, but we are committed to just the opposite. We will follow developments in this disgraceful legislative trend closely and keep you updated.